All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at how algebra changes the way we write operations. Now remember, there are only 4 operations in all of mathematics. You can add and you can subtract, and algebra will change those a little bit, but it will not change the symbols. So those won't change. The ones that change most are multiplication and division. And we saw a tiny bit of that last time when someone remembered part of that notation, and we're gonna talk about it a little bit more today. So these are the 2 operations that change the most, the multiplication and division. So we're going to start with those and talk about our algebraic notation. Okay? First of all, we'll talk about multiplication because that's the one that changes the most. There are lots of different ways to write multiplication, and that is especially true in algebra. Now, generally, if I wanted to say 4 times A, remember, because we have letters and numbers now, right? Then if I was saying 4 times A, we would use the multiplication symbol. You'll also see me replace that multiplication symbol with a dot. That also is an indication of multiplication, and you'll see it sometimes in books, oftentimes when I write it. So I just want you to be aware of it. But in algebra is all about shorthand. It's about not writing anything that you don't have to. Okay? So if I were going to write 4 times A, I can simply write 4 and then the A right next to it. Anytime you see 2 terms or 2 pieces of information side by side like that, that always indicates multiplication. And you can do it with 2 letters as well. So if I say AB, that literally means A times B. Okay? So multiplication is the only operation that requires no symbol at all. So you might want to write that down. Multiplication is the only operation that requires no symbol at all. Pause here, give you. The only time that doesn't work is if you have 2 constants. And remember, we introduced that word constant before. A constant just means a number. So if I was going to write 5 times 5, for example, I couldn't write it as 5, 5. So that is not equal to 5, 5, right? Because now you have 55, and 5 times 5, of course, is 25, right? So that one cannot work. It's only when you have a number times a letter, or 2 letters or 3 letters multiplied together. You see the difference? Okay. We can also use brackets to represent multiplication. And we've seen this when we were dealing with other order of operations types of problems. So I could write 4 times A as a 4 right in front of a bracket and then the A inside the bracket. So that literally means 4 times my A. I could also have a bracket around both of them. Notice there's absolutely nothing between those brackets. If there were a plus or a minus between them, then it can't be multiplication. They have to be just side by side, all by themselves. And that, again, is the same as saying 4 times A. And you can see it, but it's very rare. But this bracket in front of on the 4 with the A after also means 4 times A. Now again, the key here is that there's nothing between the bracket and the multiplier. Okay? All right.
Can we take a minute to quickly write this down?
Sure. All right. We also need to think about index notation or exponents. Because we could have a lot of things multiplied together, and we can still use exponents to represent those. So for example, if you had 2 times 2 times 2, we could write that as 2 to the third power. Power is another word for exponents. And we can do the same thing when we have letters. So if I have a times another a, that would be a to the third power. So just like we had before. Now, you can also have brackets raised to a power. Now this one looks funny, but just look at it. It's exactly the same process. If I have 4a times 4a times 4a, those brackets stacked together like that with no pluses or minuses in between them always indicate multiplication. So I'm multiplying the same thing over and over. So that would be 4a to the third power. And notice you must keep the bracket. And we'll look more at brackets later. But you must keep that bracket. Right, so these are all the ways you're going to see multiplication written. So you're going to see this quite a lot in lots of different ways. So multiplication is the operation that changes the most mainly because they don't want to have to write anything they don't have to. And you're going to see in algebra, everything is about simplicity. Keep it as simple as you can. Don't use symbols when you don't need symbols. Now, you'll see the book bounces back and forth. Sometimes they write it as 4a, sometimes they'll write it as 4 times a, but really you need to pay close attention to keeping them as simple as possible. All right, one other thing about multiplication. Let's say we had c times b times a. So those are 3 letters multiplied together. And right now I'm showing them with the multiplication symbols. But do I need the multiplication symbols to indicate that these things need to be multiplied together?
No.
No, absolutely.
No.
Okay?
No.
Now, you might be tempted to write CBA, just put them in the order they are. But we don't like that notation because if you're going to write down a bunch of letters, there's a notation you should be using. We should always be putting those in order. And what's the order for letters?
A, B, C.
There you go, alphabetical order. So that should really be written A, B, C. This is the best notation. Now, I wouldn't count it wrong if you wrote that, but you're going to find that if you don't put them in alphabetical order, that it could cause you some trouble later on down the road, simply because you won't know that these are what are called like terms if they don't look alike. So CBA is the same thing as ABC, but it would be easier not to have to worry about that by simply putting everything in alphabetical order. Okay, it's just a convention that makes your life easier, and you want to make your life easier, yeah? Same thing with something like this. We have C times 4 times A. Now, since I'm multiplying those 3 things together, I don't need a symbol at all. So, and I know that the letters I want in alphabetical order, but one of those things is a constant or a numerical term, a number. So what I'm going to do is I could write C4A, but that looks really bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the number in front and the letters in alphabetical order. So tradition puts the constant, get used to that word, constant always means a number, the constant in front of the variables. And you're going to see more about why that's true next class time we meet. We're going to talk about that quite a lot. Okay? So if you have more than one letter, alphabetical order. If you have letters and numbers, number in front, and then alphabetical order. All right, So that's a lot of stuff about multiplication, and it's simply because multiplication is the operation that changes the most. Now let's talk a little bit about division. Division in algebra changes a little bit. Oops, I can't spell algebra, that's not good. Lockdown's not working for me. Okay, division in algebra will change a bit. Now you will still see the old traditional division symbol. But if you look at the division symbol, and we've talked about this before, is really just a fraction bar with a dot for the numerator and a dot for the denominator. So originally, division wasn't written using the division symbol. Division was written as a fraction. And that's the way you're going to see it most of the time in algebra, which is one reason why we've spent so much time talking about how to use fractions, because you're going to see a lot of them in algebra. Now, that shouldn't make you panic, because remember, your calculators can do the division for you. You're allowed to use your calculator on every section except the number section, so you should be happy with that, so don't worry about that. And we'll talk about how to use them as we go forward. Does mean we have to know a little bit about fractions, though, and we'll talk about those as we need them. Okay? So if I want to write A divided by B, I could use the division symbol, but the best way of writing that would be A over B. Okay? Give you a moment. All right. Now, do remember, though, that if you write something as a fraction, it is still division, and it has to obey the fraction rules. So literally, A over B means A divided by B. And remember, you can either divide. Sometimes you can't divide evenly, so you can simplify, which means things that are common to both the top and the bottom, right? And sometimes you can do nothing. Yeah? So, and we'll do lots of these, so don't worry about that. You don't even need to write it down right now unless you want to. Can't hurt you, but I'm not going to keep waiting for you for that one. Okay? All right, so what I'm going to do is pause the recording and go to the book. So here we are at the book. So let's look at this. So rules for writing algebraic expressions. So they're talking about the notation. So product notation. Remember that product is simply the name when you multiply. So generally, unless it's going to be really confusing, you leave out the multiplication symbols between quantities. And as we talked about, numbers are always written before variables in any product. So 2 times A or A times 2, we would simply write as 2A. If there are more than 2 variables, we write them in alphabetical order. So 2 times B times A becomes 2AB. Okay, so you have some of those. Don't forget index notation. Here I have 4 2's multiplied together, so that becomes 2 to the 4th power. 4 A's multiplied together becomes A to the 4th power, right? And then we go straight into the exercises. This is something that we've learned before. When a product is written out in full, we say it is in expanded form. If it's written as an exponent, that's exponential form or index form. So this top one, like if you look here at this one, 2 times A times A times A times B, that's called expanded form. And then 2A to the 3rd, B to the 2nd is called exponential form. Okay? So just going to go through a couple of these. You can just unmute your microphones and just kind of sing out with me here. I'm not going to put this in the recording, but so that it doesn't matter if we have too much noise. All right, so again, this is expanded form. You simply take C squared is C times C plus 4 times D times D times D. Okay? Right? I'm going to go back just for the benefit of the recording and put this one back in. So here, it's 4 times the bracket. So instead of writing the multiplication symbol, we can just put that 4 right up next to the bracket. Here, it's a bracket times 7. And we always, if we have a number times something else, we always put just the plain old number first. And then finally, the last ones, you're just going to use index notation. So let's just look at K here. We have a number, so that we know numbers go first. We have X's and we have Y's and we have Z's. So we'll put the X's first. But there's only one factor of X, so that's just a plain old X. There are two factors of Y, so that's Y to the second power. And there are two factors of Z, so that's Z to the second power. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Looks good? It's about keeping it simple, keeping things easy. All right. Let me look and see if there are any others. I think that's it. Yep, that's it. So what you're going to do is, during class time, is you're going to work on exercise 7A.2. That's on page... Oops, I can't see my page number. Hold on a minute. Page 142. Okay, so 7A.2. It's on page 142. Okay. Now, you don't have to do all of them. Just do some until you're comfortable. Do some from each one. So if there are 5 different questions, or here on number 3, there are, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 8 different questions. Maybe do 4 of these. Okay? So maybe half of the assignment, at least. Now, you can do all of it if you want to. Of course, you can do all of it. But if you don't need to, just do about half of it. Just get some practice with this. This is fairly simple, okay? And I don't want to take up your whole day doing these. All right, so, read your notes. Make sure you remember that the notes are the method. That's the important thing. That's what you should be studying. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do homework to practice it. Okay? And then next time we'll talk about some more algebraic notation